I'm very excited to invite you or welcome you to our first panel, which is titled Parks and Rec, Green Spaces in the Urban. And the discussion will explore the historical, cultural, ecological, and economic impacts of public parks in the city. And it's my pleasure to welcome our speakers for this evening. We have with us Suresh Jayaram. He's an artist, art historian, arts administrator, and curator from Bangalore. He's the founder director of visual art collective, One Shanti Studio. Most recently, he's authored Bangalore's Lal Bagh, a chronicle of the garden and the city in 2021. Vena Kapoor, who's also joining us, started nature classrooms in 2018 as part of the Nature Conservation Foundation's Education and Public Engagement Program. With her team, she works closely with primary school teachers and educators through training workshops, research, and by co-developing age-appropriate, locally and culturally relevant nature learning curriculum. Our moderator for this evening is Harini Nagendra, and she's a professor of ecology at Azim Premji University and a well-known public speaker and writer on nature and sustainability. Her non-fiction books include Nature in the City, Bengaluru in the Past, Present and Future, and 2 books co-authored with Seema Mundoli, So Many Leaves in Cities and Canopies, Trees in Indian Cities. The Bangalore Detectives Club is her first crime fiction novel published in 2022, and she's just released a follow-up, and we have all the books written by the authors available in our bookstores, which is behind you, so please do pick up a copy. Thank you all for joining us, and Harini, over to you, please.
You can hear me in the back? Yes, yes. So thank you so much, Asha, and big thank you to IHS, I think, for hosting this panel, which is a discussion much needed. If you talk about cities today, you have to talk about parks and what they mean to the city. And so it's a real pleasure for us to be here. If you don't mind, I'll repeat Asha's invitation to those sitting in the back. I know it's an annoying teacher habit, but can some of you come from the back and to the front? If you can, that would be very nice. Thank you. So, yeah, so getting into this, how many of you have visited a park in the last month? I think almost all of us, right? So yeah, I think that tells us, you know, not having a park in a city would be a very, very sad thing, I think, for all of us. And parks and green spaces, spaces of nature, however you want to call them, are very important for us as communities, as individuals, but also as communities, as commons, as places that we all meet our friends or meet community, get to know people, feel a part of the city. As some of you know, I'm an ecologist who's been studying nature in the city for a number of years. And if I look at Bangalore and think of the kinds of things we've been looking at parks we found are extraordinarily important to migrants into the city to make them feel connected to the city. It helps in the sense of place and making, you know, why would you care about a city? India's cities are growing so fast, right? So we are already 33% urban. People say in the next 20 years, we're going to become more than 50% urban. Why would a migrant care about the city unless they feel that sense of attachment? And when we talk to people, they say, you know, site of it could be a neem tree, or it could be an egret at a lake, or a neem tree at the park. But that makes them think of the place they came from and make them feel connected to the city. And then they talk to the people that otherwise you don't get to meet in a city. And then they get involved with movements to protect the city, or just, you know, dog walkers associations, or all kinds of social activities. So very important for commons. But the commons, third thing that we don't realize, especially park managers, I think, in Bangalore do not realize, is that parks mean much more to all kinds of people. They are sacred spaces, they are places of grazing, they are places of foraging, they are places where you do much more than just look at nature or commune with nature and go for a walk and exercise and meet people. You know, there's a lot of embodied activity in association with the park. What we call in ecological parlance provisioning ecosystem services, which just mean that there is this, you know, parks also give you things that you take from them. And we need to understand these services, because otherwise what you do is you gate the parks, you lock them, and you don't allow people inside. And finally, I think, not just finally, I'm sure there are many things we have not covered, but another very important thing is the biodiversity component. And there is research by, for instance, Savita Swami's PhD work at A3, which showed that all of the parks in the city, whether the very large ones or the very small pocket parks, are hugely important for biodiversity connections. Even for things like, for instance, birds and butterflies that move from North Bangalore, from Bannerghatta National Park to the reserve forest in North Bangalore, and the pocket parks act like these resting spaces along the way, that they help them to move up and down. You know, so they have, I think, a lot of different things to give us. there are many things that we unfortunately, the way we understand parks, and when I say we understand parks, it doesn't necessarily mean us in the room, but as a city thinks, as the policies of the city thinks, as the administrators of the city think, is a very unidimensional way of parks as these spaces to be gated and fenced and protected. I'm sure all of you have heard about the recent controversies of Cubbon Park. Is there anyone who hasn't? So if you can't picnic in the park, if you're a couple, you can't hang out in the park together. If you dog workers, it's very difficult to walk your dogs in the park. There's so many rules of what you can't do. You can't take photographs in the park. I mean, you start wondering what these places are for. You can just go in and do a couple of very, very distant things. And then if it's such an arm's length relationship with the park, how do you actually develop relationships, right? So some of these are the issues we're going to talk about today. And I don't want to go on because I have two experts with me who've been working on Bangalore for a very long time and come with very rich perspectives. So maybe I'll just start by handing over to each of them and asking them to tell us a little bit about what they've done. So first, to begin with you, Suresh. Suresh Jayaram, of course, has been working on Bangalore for a very long time, and we all know what he's been doing in the culture and art history field. But he's also written a lovely book on Lal Bagh. How many of you have read it? If you haven't, you should go out and look at it. And if it's available there, please take a look, pick up a copy. He also told me now that he's in the middle of finishing up another book on Cubbon Park. So first, if you could tell us about those two, your association with them, and what do you think we should be thinking about? What's the most important thing we should talk about?
Thank you, Harini. It's comforting to have you next to me because we think on the same lines, but in different perspectives. I'm missing actually Rupa, who I don't know very well, but I attended a book launch and we are not kind of close friends, but we know each other's work. Somebody asked me, why are you writing a book on Cubbon Park? So it's already there. So my perspective is totally different. One is that I'm a hardcore Bangalorean. My ancestry is that we come from the Tigala community, who are gardeners, and people who came from Tamil Nadu 500 years ago, settled down over here because of Hyder Ali, etc. And we believe this is our home. And we settled down around Lal Bagh or Siddhapura, etc. and Mavalli. So my grandparents were there and they had orchards, and grandmother did mention that they had apple trees in their garden. So it was like fairy tale kind of thing. I have not seen an apple tree growing. And so that was one of the triggers for me to start working on this elusive apple tree. So I have to tell you where I am from. Actually, I'm located between Cubbon Park and Lal Bagh. Thank my parents. So I asked somebody, what was Shantinagar like? That's where I live. When you were in those days. So they said, Shantinagar higa Shantinagar and Karitivi, but this is was called Koti Topu. So what is this Koti Topu? Koti Topu is the monkeys coming from Lal Bagh had to pass by Shantinagar to go to Cubbon Park. So it kind of ravaged everything in sight from mango, a lot of mango trees in Shantinagar, and it goes to Cubbon Park. So my life also is like this Koti. I move from Lal Bagh to Cubbon Park. I have the luxury and maybe privilege to access both these parks because they are 1 kilometer away. So what do I do when I go to these parks is like, I know these parks like the back of my hand. I don't know anything else, and things are around it. So that's why these two books are coming out. So one of the important things I've felt is in this contemporary time, I feel quite suffocated by looking at these boards. Don't touch this, don't sit here, don't stand there, etc. So this is, if this is democracy, then how do we exercise ourselves as citizens? So I might be a writer, but the first thing I do is I go for a walk in the morning. So, and there are others who come for the park for many other reasons, to play cricket, to climb trees. We are not allowed to climb trees. But looking back at my childhood, if I've grown up as somebody who loves nature, it is between these two parks. And my parents thought the best thing to do with mischievous kids is to leave them in the park and come and pick them up after 3 hours. So I literally grew up in these two parks. So the other important thing is gentrification is one major problem. The thing is that also these parks have other kind of rules like gates being closed, etc. Then if you look closely at the park, you see that there are people who come at different times of the park. Like early morning, 5 o'clock, you have somebody coming with, I think they have a transistor or a mobile phone with Subba Lakshmi Suprabhatam loudly. And you have others, I mean, you have workers coming from Vidhan Sauda and the High Court at 12 o'clock because they have a lunch break. Then you have lawyers, then you have Vidhan Sauda, people working in Vidhan Sauda. And then nobody is also kind of figuring out what happens after 6 o'clock. So I took a bunch of Shishti kids who said they wanted to see the landscape of Cubbon Park. And it was dark. And I led them around with small torches, etc. I said, explore the park in the night. So the first thing they said that it should be all lit. And they didn't realize that the park is inhabited by people who are sex workers, and the park also belongs to them. It's just not us who are gentrified, going there in the morning for exercises, etc. But it is a livelihood for these sex workers. And one of the major interviews, which is quite sensational, which is there in this forthcoming book on Cubbon Park, is by Akai, who is a transgender activist. And she's spoken so well, I can't tell you, I can call it kick-ass interview, where she's demolished everybody from the cops to the people who come to harass them, etc. And how she made Cubbon Park her home. And how she feels she's been evicted. And there's, from there to one more person I'll say is Chiranjeev Singh, who is a very close friend of mine, who saw the park from Vidhan Sauda. So he's an IAS officer, very popular, speaks Kannada. Sardarji speaking Kannada is quite a unique thing for us. And he said, I said, sir, what is your contribution? He said, when I was in the government, I saw it was more of a Maidan. And now it's become an urban forest. Because one fine day they said that let's plant more trees. So they made it into a forest now. And he says one of the big reasons that he feels that he's contributed something for Bangalore is that he made sure that the metro went underground for good reasons. Because imagine the metro going between High Court and Vidhan Sauda. It would have been the worst eyesore Bangalore could ever see. So there are many stories I can tell you on the way, but for me, these are lung spaces. Not going to these parks makes me very uncomfortable. So, and this has been part of my life. So that's how I've been growing up, and also seeing that these places are so significant for not only me, but many other people. There's a peanut seller in Cubbon Park. He said that they don't allow him to go inside. Now he has to pay 1,000 rupees bribe. So he's saying he's been there for 40 years. And I don't know how he's going to live, but he sells peanuts so that people feed the peanuts to the squirrels. So I've seen him for more than 40 years. So it's all these people who are there. I mean, they need the park too, it's just not us. So I think I'll ask you to say more.
Thanks. I think that was very moving, and I think that's true, because one of the challenges of the gentrified city to me is the fact that we sit here in discussions like this or replicate discussions like this elsewhere, and we forget that there are other people that the city also belongs to. And I mean, I know Sukanya is here, and she did some very interesting master's thesis work on the street vendors of Hyderabad, and how what's their right to the city. They identify that the trees much more, and they all say the trees are their home because they live and work and everything under the trees. We never think about them when we do consultative meetings, you know. So I think these are really important things. Who talks about sex workers and their rights to the city? You know, I'm thinking of when we started work on Kaikondalli Lake restoration, and one of the things we had argued for is that the island to the lake should not be connected to the mainland, because then they wanted lights and, you know, places where people look at birds, because it was bad for bird activity. But then the administrators came up with this theory that if you do this, then otherwise the sex workers will take over the island. And so, you know, you use all kinds of spurious arguments to actually argue for more concrete, more lights, more surveillance, and other kinds of things. And we, in this case, of course, they were very receptive. We managed to convince them. But in many cases, one is not able to do that. So absolutely. I'm just going to say one last thing before I hand it over to Vena. I think we need to somehow change public consciousness of these things. And again, when I say public, I mean, maybe that's something we could start with schools. I was looking at a tweet of somebody in England who works on nature education. And he was saying he showed children 2 photographs of an urban park. One with a very mowed lawn, green and the other one with a messy, weedy sort of lawn, with which is of course more biodiversity rich. And all the kids said this is untidy and messy, and it should be clean and neat and well mowed. And then he started telling them about these, and he said, what are we doing if 95% of the children are saying they want the mowed lawn, they want the clean look, and they want everything to be tidy? What are we doing wrong with education? So yeah, with that, I think it's a perfect time to hand over to Vena. Can you tell us, you've been working with children and nature education as well as doing research on biodiversity. So I think there's 2 aspects, right? Your urban research on biodiversity in the city, as well as the education of little children, many of whom are from government schools and are getting restricted from parks. So can you tell people about your work, and what has that made you think differently about the parks in the city?
Thanks, Harini. So I came to Bangalore actually in late 2014, so I'm relatively new to the city. I'm from Chennai. And the first thing that struck me when I visited the neighborhood park closest to my home was that I couldn't go after 10 o'clock in the morning. And it was closed from 10 to 4. And I asked the person who was gatekeeping, saying, why can't I go inside? And he said, oh, that's the instructions. And so I spoke to a few people around saying, because it seemed bizarre to me that a common park area would be restricted to people who have every right to be there and to enjoy whatever's in the park. And he said, no, that's the instructions I've been given. BBMP has told me that this is what I need to do. Now, this was 6 years back. The thing that's changed in the last 4 months in the same neighborhood park is that 50% of the park has been taken over by the temple, which has been expanding. And just before the elections, there was a huge frenzy of construction in this place. Huge cement trucks coming in. And there's this large statue of, I will not name the individual, but that's been kind of constructed right there in the middle of the neighborhood park. And so again, I was curious that, these are places where you would walk around, and even people who would see you walking a little bit off the path to look at a leaf, to take a photograph of a spider or an insect, would say, madam, you're not allowed over there. Please come back. And I'm stepping from here to there, right? Even that was so restricting, and people in the neighborhood were loving for this construction to happen. And then I realized how far removed from, from governance or from decision-making we are, and how helpless in some sense we feel. This kind of restriction of park areas kind of really drove home, at least it was driven home to me much more when I was working with Parikrama schools a few years back. And many of our schools in Bangalore, if you see, including government schools, have little to no space outside for the children or for the teachers. And as nature educators, we keep saying, go outside, go outdoors. Your children need to experience the outdoors. And they looked at me and said, where can we go? And I said, there's a neighborhood park right there. They said, yes, but it's closed from 10 to 4. So I said, okay, can we petition? They said, we've tried. And there's nothing we can do about it. So then you have to take them outside. And they said, outside on the roads is dangerous. So it really kind of drove home the point that, we need to get out of this apathy and demand that our public spaces are open for us, and to also shift our perspective of who are parks for. Yes, it's meant for citizens and for migrants and for everyone who's, I don't want to use the word citizens because it comes so loaded these days, but for everyone, but also for nature, for its own sake, right? Whether it's the birds that use them, the butterflies that use them. And Harini, thanks for alluding to that study. I was going to point out to that, where it's not just the big parks like Kapoor Park and Lal Bagh and maybe Avalahalli now, which is, a lot of people from North Bangalore are going to those spaces, but also the smaller neighborhood parks that we really, really need to look out for and fight for, and to actually make them also educational spaces. So that things like what you just talked about, this showing of the picture of this manicured lawn as opposed to a diverse wild area, kids seem to like a manicured lawn. Why is that? Because visually, that's what we're shown all the time. And so as part of our nature education work that we're doing, we're trying to get that wild back into the nature vocabulary, not just by taking children and teachers. I work more with teachers than children because I think that's a more sustainable way of doing the work. So to take them and show them examples of how nature functions in many ways, right? And it's not just the simple like food chain and food web which they read about in their textbooks, but actually showing them how in their backyard, the kind of amazing biodiversity that can be viewed if they just look at it with a fresh set of eyes. And so that's, I really think we need to think of parks also as educational spaces. Yeah, so I'll stop there for now, and then maybe we can.
I'm doing something to the mics. So, I was just in Italy for 6 weeks doing a visiting professorship with a university called Lewis University, which works on urban commons revitalization, and very interesting work. But what I found very fascinating was all the parks in Rome, and there's so many parks in Rome, don't mow their lawns. They're all wild, weedy, you walk through. Of course, one nice thing is there are no snakes. Not nice thing. Nice thing for those who walk through. Not nice thing for the ecology is that there are no snakes because they've got rid of all their snakes, right? Almost all their wildlife. So you walk through these parks, you can actually walk through them in a way I think we would not dare to walk through in Cubbon Park in knee-deep grass with the same ease that we would walk through. Anyway, so Rome's parks all very, very weedy in that sense and overgrown. Milan's parks, and I went there also for a work visit, very, very trimmed. Even the trees are in little concrete circles. I mean, there is enough space for water to percolate. It's not like Bangalore where it's concreted to the roots, but very neat in rows, rows, columns, very, very neatly laid out. Now, the Romans all will tell you that you work on urban ecology. Rome's parks are not good, no? Very dirty, very messy. You should be like the Milanese. And the Milanese say, yeah, our urban ecology is really good because they have this architect who grows trees in apartments. And so that's supposed to be very sustainable because you have trees in apartments. Now, those trees grow too large for apartments. You have to cut them every 4-5 years. You have to pour in huge amount of pesticide and fertilizer to keep them going. But they think that is urban ecology, and the Roman parks, which are fabulous for me, I mean, coming from Bangalore's things, were very dirty and messy. So I'm thinking, this is a Bangalore issue, but this is clearly not a Bangalore issue. This is also a worldwide issue that we somehow with urbanization, we want this sense of neatness, and maybe your signs that you're talking about, Suresh, are in that order. Know your place. Don't step outside the dotted line or the concrete line. I don't know how to change this. What are the ways? Yeah.
So one of the research projects that we've been doing is to also understand. We wanted to understand how children of the age group of from 6 to 8 standard, basically, right? How are they perceiving nature in the city? And so the research student who works with us, Ashish, when he was speaking to the kids directly, there's also this perception that wild nature or things that are not manicured or have lovely lawns are also dangerous places for these children, because parents and even teachers are telling them, don't go there. They're dangerous places. A, because they're snakes, but also they're places where older men hang out, right? And so they're perceiving these places as dangerous spaces. And so that's such a tragedy. And so through conversations, we're trying to understand, and these children say, we want to go there, but we're not old enough to go there. Maybe when we get older, we'll be able to go there, because no, that's a dangerous place. And so they prefer looking at parks as spaces to hang out in those limited time that they have, but they don't see them as places to engage with nature at all, right? They're picnic places they want to go out. And with the kids that we work with who come from outside of Bangalore, so migrant worker kids who are studying in government schools, nature is in their uru. So it's in their village. nature is not here. And so then they give anecdotes about that. And it's when they go back, they engage with nature. And it's not ever in the city. Because again, these places are completely cut off for them. This is much more true in peri-urban Bangalore as well, right? As a city is expanding, we're seeing fewer and fewer parks, or at least planned parks within neighborhood localities, which used to be part of the planning, is just completely now not seen in any of the planning phases. So as you go towards Yelahanka, as you go towards Hesarghatta area, none of these parks exist. There are no parks. So wild spaces, which to us as ecologists are exciting places to go and explore, are dangerous places for these kids, right? So when we talk about giving them access to nature, there are so many layers to it that we need to take into account, right? The social layer, the economic layer, how gendered these spaces are as well. Yeah.
I'm just thinking of this now. I remember when I was in college, we would go to Cubbon Park in groups, but we would never dare to go to Lal Bagh because the older men hang out and you get harassed. And I think that's this, or younger men even hang. And I think this is sort of part of the gendering and the challenges of dealing with these parks. But I also wanted to ask both of you, I think we talk a lot about the challenges, and we should talk about the challenges. In all the diversity of people that you meet and the examples how does one actually tackle this more hopefully? Are there things that you feel that we could do? For instance, if I think of one thing that a while ago there's a collective called Mara, which used to work on these parks. And some of the collective things that Mara did to reclaim these spaces, flash mobs or doing, they did these urban art installations when they started, the area near the Victoria statue in Cubbon Park was one of the first to be gated, and they closed that down. And the street vendors were taken out. And so Mara did these things where they actually took over the park and asked people to come in and make temporary art installations and hang them on the fence. Next Sunday, when they did it again, they would have all gone, because basically by Sunday evening, the cops would come or the cleaners would come and take them away. But they kept going at it for about 3-4 months. And that made some kind of a shift. So are there things like this that are positive examples?
One of the interviews in the book is by Mara and the gang that worked in these spaces. The other one is Jasmine Pateja. She did a workshop where she allowed women to come and sleep at the park. So you choose a particular day and time, so they bring their mats, they bring their books, or they just come and sleep in the park. So they're physically occupying this place. Another couple of friends who work in Vimochana said that this was a park which is so aesthetic for us, but also a place where all our agitations happen from here. And all the agitations are under Queen Victoria for reasons best known to us. It's a best preserved statue. And this is like home to them. There was no agitation without, and there were farmers' agitations. And if you remember right, one major political event I remember is when Rajkumar was kidnapped and he was brought back from the forest from wherever. They kind of presented him in steps of Vidhan Sauda. So it was like a major thing, and you always had some, we have a very interesting politician, Vatal Nagraj, who comes on a camel or a donkey when the prices of petrol goes up. So where do you have this drama? It has to be this Vidhan Sauda and Cubbon Park. And I also want to, I've noticed a lot of people, and I'm quite a person who wants to catch some conversations as people are walking. 99% is about real estate prices. Nobody wants to look at a leaf or what flower is blooming in that season, nothing. They want to know where they can make the cheapest deal, what they're selling and what they're going to buy. And one interesting thing I've noticed in Lal Bagh is everybody looking up at one tree. And it's there in the book in the last chapter. They're looking to spot owls. Why? Does anybody know? Should I stop here and say read my book? But I'll tell you the story. No, actually they believe that the owl is a symbol of Lakshmi. And if they see the owl that day, they're going to make a lot of money. But where will the owl come if there's no trees? I mean, there's no Lakshmi nor Saraswati, I think. But this kind of imagination is very interesting. Everybody's looking up. and they're trying to spot the small owlets which are, like struggling to survive in the treetop. And I feel 90% of them don't even look at anything. They don't smell a flower, or they don't even try to even pick up something. They are just blindly doing these circles. They meet up with friends, go to MTR, have breakfast, and push off. So parks are there, like it's actually Lal Bagh is a botanical garden. It's not like Urban Park. So what is the difference? Arm twisting of the Walkers Association has happened in Lal Bagh, which also, I think there's also some power in Cubbon Park. There's some Umesh and somebody, a lot of these people saying that we need to do things for the citizens of Bangalore, etc. But it's going to take time. Most importantly, if we don't educate children about the neighborhood gardens, and if we don't make things like a treasure hunt, or make them, like draw leaves of different shapes, etc., or create different ways in which they could engage. Because I did a small workshop with teachers of Montessori schools. I told them that you draw a map of the park after I've seen you. So each one had a different map of Lal Bagh. Then another incident was that I made them sit there and really smell things. So we collected a lot of things, and from eucalyptus leaf, which you crush and you can smell something, to Sampige Mara, Magnolia Champaka, that has a different smell. There are ylang flowers in Lal Bagh, which you could smell, and like it is another perfume. There's juniperus, which is what is used to make, I think, gin. Gin is flavored by juniperus. So there's a range of things. And it's a very fascinating thing. We were walking around trying to figure out a tree. A gentleman came and said, "Do you know what this tree is?" We didn't know, and he said, "This is cut," he said. Wondering what cut is. I believe cut is a very interesting plant, which we didn't know. It is like we friends said that it's like a male burqa. It's going to reduce male testosterone in young boys who are very frisky. So I think it has to be planted more. And it's amazing that this thing exists in the park and nobody knows about it. So discovering trees, discovering plants, not about going for a walk. It's also being curious. I think if we lose our curiosity as common people, as artists, as people who are interested in the environment, I think we're kind of like zombies going every day out to walk and coming back and thinking that we're going to be super healthy or something like that. I think curiosity, inquisitiveness, and the idea of, like discovering something new, I think every day is a new discovery. If there's a rain, there are mushrooms coming out. There are different insects. There's an ant which is only found in Bangalore, which people have found. A frog that is only found in Bangalore. So I feel there's so many ways for us to look at these neighborhood gardens, and there can be libraries, and there should be information centers that allow people to really understand what these gardens are all about. Although I'm focusing on Cubbon Park and Lal Bagh, I just met two gentlemen, very old gentlemen from Bihar, and I started talking to them in Hindi. They were shocked to know the history of Lal Bagh. I showed them the map, I spoke to them for 15 minutes, and I told them they were near the gate near MTR, and I told them go back and see this. They were very happy to do that. And I thought I'll do this service, like to the nation, stand there as a guide and tell people to go back, look at the park with your map, smell flowers, do things that are curious, and enjoy yourself, And I think we are really, really fortunate that we've got these neighborhood parks, and the bigger parks are obviously there. Richmond Park has a community group which had a library there. They did exhibitions there. So each park is taken over by the locals, and they can do something with it. I think we need to push the government to make this happen. If there's no voice of people, there's no voice of horticulture department, which is making them into cages. And horticulture department is not bothered. The first thing they'll ask you if you want information, PhD ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದೀರಾ, something like that. Only you people who are working here want to know. And when you present them with the book, the Lal Bagh book, I went and presented the book to the director. The first question he asked me that, where did you get all this? And he's sitting on all this information. So that is a story.
PhDs don't get get access to the Lal Bagh library. So yes. So I think one more thing I wanted to, I've just you reminded me of. How many of you know there's a Kaban Park book club? It's very new. It's 6 months old. Yeah, so it's such a lovely thing. I got to know because somebody reached out to me for one of my books. But so it's very simple. The fourth Sunday of every month, they just set out a tweet and something else on different social media saying we're meeting, and it's next to the Seshadripuram library. So they just occupy the park and they pick 3 different books so that different people who are depending on your interest can come. And one of the reasons, I mean, you obviously know this, is to occupy the park and use that. And it was. I mean, they said every month you get 150 to 200 people. Which is, this is yours is a different thing. Okay, so this is a different. They call it Kaban Park Book Club, and it's completely on social media. So they send this tweet out, and people turn up, and then they pick 3 different books because the whole idea is that it should appeal to everyone. So 3 selections, and you just get into your group depending on which book you have, and you sit down or stand or walk around and you explicitly reclaim the park. And that's what they said, that they felt that the park was being gated, so they're taking it back. I thought that was a beautiful thing. And the fact that 150 people turn up for me was very hopeful. So, Vena, over to you.
What can we do? I think, we have to, like I said in the beginning, shake off our apathy. I think to also look beyond just the day of voting and hoping for a change, to actually engage much more with, I think, resident welfare associations are very powerful groups. You keep hearing a lot of negative things about them, but I think maybe, if we as ecologists and nature educators don't engage with them much more in a more sustained way at least, that's the perception of what parks should be, right? Or what areas around their neighborhood should be like. And so I think if we need to really push the envelope in terms of our engagement with thing, and this happens also in the area where I live, because I rent a house, I'm not invited. For example, many of us are not invited into the welfare association meetings because they're only meant for owners of plots and this thing, right? So no idea who's making these decisions, what happens in those meetings, no idea. We're also not welcome there. And so, for example, when I was surprised with my neighborhood park, with all this concrete business happening, so I went and spoke to a few people who are using the park, and when I spoke to them, I said, what can we do? That's how it is. And I can see older people having to navigate bricks and concrete blocks which have been put in the walking paths. Right? And somehow people seem to think, well, what can we do? This is how it is. And that's a really sad state to be in. I know we all have like battles that we want to pick, but like both of you said, we need these. We should be proud that we have these neighborhood parks, but we have to make sure it doesn't become a horticulture department experiment where they're trying to only grow certain pretty-looking plants in what looks pretty to them. But for example, Tumbi, the Lucas aspera, which grows wildly in our, next to our roads, if left, if the roads are not constantly cleared, are extremely important small herby species that attract bees, solitary bees especially. So important for our ecosystem, and these are never grown in our neighborhood parks. They're not allowed to grow. Calotropis, the yakamara, again, which is symbolic culturally, right, for puja. People, lots of them, collect the flowers, but somehow in our neighborhood parks, they're not allowed to grow because they don't look pretty. Right, so we, as ecologists, I think we have to engage, or we have to force the horticulture department and BBMP to engage with us more, call us to the table. Or we have to really do a citizen hattal or occupying of spaces, and not just the big Kavan parks and Lal Baghs, but really our neighborhood parks as well.
Absolutely, I think. So this is, good time to turn to the audience and ask if you have any questions, or and comments of things that we could do, But also questions or any stories you want to share of your favorite parks.
I think Mr. Nawale should share his story.
At Kapoor Park a lot. Every Shivratri we used to spend the night there. Yeah, and those days we were young, and that was the time. A lot of people will congregate, Shivratri all night people will move around everywhere. And other than that, we used to have music in the parks. In that book also, I see there's something called the music strip in the 80s which started. Battery-powered amplifiers and guitars, and played electric guitars with battery power those days. Because just after the Beatles, time, so we were all influenced by them a lot. And other thing I wanted to, from hearing you people talk, you associate snakes and older people in the same breath, First thing is about snakes are not bad. Snakes are not, and I have a small piece of paradise about 25 kilometers away, just nature. I let it grow wild and I go there just to get away because parks are not allowed nowadays here. So there are a lot of snakes, but in the 25 years I owned this piece of property, I've seen it only once. Just once slithering there. Snakes are not to be worried about. They are cobras, they are kraits, nothing to worry about them. They mind their own business. So one need not worry about it. So this fear element, because we teach children snake will come from Adam and Eve stories, this snake and all that. So nothing, and even not all men are bad guys. I mean, see, I'm a nice guy.
No, that's true.
So this fear of men, snakes need not be there. Yeah.
I love the idea of sleeping in the park, by the way, but that is something. So I'm just curious again. Shivratri, were there also women sleeping? Sit, Jayaram, of course. Okay, yes. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's like I'm architect Sarojini here. It's very interesting to hear one part of it. I'll share my individual story, where I'm also a native Bangalorean. I used to live on the Rupatunga Road, and actually we had a house which was behind the Mythic Society library. It actually belonged to the RSS, small, like a house which didn't have a room. It was in between the St. Martha's Hospital and the Government Arts and Science College. So it was a large piece of land which had Hunse Mara and this one Honge Mara, lot of trees. Ours was a little bit of property. I mean, it actually belonged to another person, but we lived there 23 years. So our only entertainment was we had to walk to Kapoor Park. I learned to cycle in Kapoor Park. So through Rupatunga Road, we had to actually cross the Martha's Hospital also to get milk that time. Milk was not easily accessible like now. So I can relate a lot to what we are talking, and I feel nice to share all this. But then, yeah, like how you're saying, neighborhood parks is one thing, which is a new concept for us. We didn't have houses as dense as now. And even the neighborhood, whatever we have are in, more of gyms now. They have these outdoor gyms which are converted. And I can add to this by saying that every house, instead of the footpath that we have alongside the houses, there can be, because you don't really walk on the footpaths which are given outside the house property. That can be really looked at as our experimental green patches also. And I'm an urban designer, so there's another value why I'm here. We will discuss that another time. For me, how we are discussing ecology today, I'm more into history and heritage structures. So if we replace ecology with heritage, that's why I'm here. It's the same fight we are having with history and forts, and it's like the water bodies and the kalyanis that we have. So that is the next topic that we should be addressing.
Absolutely.
Another important thing is that we should look at trees as heritage also. I think we should mark heritage trees, we should protect them, and also give them nameplates so people could at least be curious to read, where everybody knows this particular cannonball tree, Nagalinga Hua. We worship it, some of them worship it, and they think it's very sacred and whatnot. It's from Africa. So it doesn't matter, but at the same time, every plant and tree is sacred. There's some special ones that we identify and we go around it many times. But I think we should look at it also as this. I want to share a small story about the Arali Katte in the corner of Cubbon Park, which is closest to the corporation circle. There's a man called Krishnamurthy who I've interviewed. He cooks a meal every day at 6 o'clock in the evening, and he just serves it to everybody, whoever comes. And the number of people who come there, they come with tiffin boxes. You and me have, food at home, but they eat there, they carry some, whatever, bisibele bath or chitrana, whatever is made, one dish. They take it home. It's heartening to see this. And he says he does it without the permission of the, obviously, horticulture department. He does it on his own. People give him money and they say this is for 30 days rice or something like that. And he has volunteers to cook the food. He's got huge bartans that are hidden in one small garage-like thing that nobody can find out. He uses the firewood from the Cubbon Park. And everybody, whoever wants to have a meal, some hot meal, it's there. Mr. Krishnamurthy is around. Whether you think you want to pray to the Taralikatte or the gods underneath, it's your problem. But you can obviously, if you want to celebrate or acknowledge your ancestors, I feel that's the best way to go and give Krishnamurthy some money. I felt that he's doing a great service. And he's almost invisible. You have to call Mr. Krishnamurthy and he'll suddenly appear on his Suega or TVS and he'll say, okay, sir, and whatnot. He even asked me, can you give me some publicity so more people can, come and donate money or whatever.
Which is what you're doing. No, this is a wonderful story. Vena, you want to?
I want to talk a little bit about, I don't know how many of you have been to Jakur Lake. Have you been to Jakur Lake? Yeah. Do you see how different it is from some of the other kind of lakes that we have access to, right? So just the kind of wild vegetation that's allowed. It's not concrete paved, places for, yeah. And also just the kind of biodiversity that you see as a result. It's just quite amazing. One difference in the Jakur Lake is that I think the resident association has taken over. I think they arm twisted the horticulture department to give it over to them. And so in some sense, they are the gatekeepers. But they allow for educational, for people who come there for nature walks, educational experiences, to keep the place open for them. And they have a very, very strict rule about how you cannot beautify, these spaces. And so as a result, you see amazing bird diversity, amazing insect and spider diversity, because they're letting kind of shrubby vegetation grow wild. And I really think we need to normalize that.
But also Jakur Lake survives because of Annapurna Kamat's and her vision, exactly. But she was also saying that they struggle because, for instance, the resident association that takes care of Rachinhalli Lake, which is much more manicured, will then go to the MLA, and then other walkers and joggers who come to Jakur will then go back to the MLA and say, you favor Rachinhalli Lake, you are not taking care of our lake because you're not investing in it because it's so dirty and messy. So she's also always fighting off not just political pressure, but other pressure from constituency. So yeah, we need to normalize these kinds of things.
I think the most dangerous thing is beautification.
Yeah, no.
And installing these statues, I think we have enough statues. I don't think anybody is inspired by these statues. So it's enough. So stop playing this game and just putting one Basavanna and Kempe Gowda right before the election, right in front of Vidhan Sauda. They are great people, I can acknowledge them. But can you really take something from what they say and practice it? No.
So if you go to the BBMP website also, and you say Bangalore parks, the only thing is they say number of parks, and then the three things are beautification of parks. But nowhere on the website does it say, what are the parks in Bangalore? None of the links work.
None of the links work. I just wanted to say one more thing before I turn back to the audience questions. There was a very interesting recent paper in Cubbon Park, in Current Science, what am I saying? Which is a science journal, which talks about carbon dating India's 10th largest banyan tree. And they say they found out that it's 450 years old from radio dating the carbon. And I'm just thinking, what about our big banyan tree, the Dalal Mara? What about those kinds of trees? We need to start doing something like that to prove that these are 200 years old or 500 years old and things like that. We have, I think, about how many? 5-10 minutes? Do we have 10 minutes? 10 minutes? Because we have not, I just want to get audience into it.
Hello. So I had a question for the panel. You have talked a little bit about parks as social spaces, but also as spaces for nature on their own. But I do wonder if human presence is a little disruptive for the second goal. So I was wondering how you would see navigating that.
Navigating human spaces as disruptors of biodiversity.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. As okay. Humans using these. Yeah. Geti?
Completely differently. And I just wanted to point it out that land development has gone completely in the wrong direction. I would actually use it as an example of how a lake should not be developed, and just point it out in contrast to Jakur. And it's just something that I wanted to mention. Yeah.
Maybe just one more question, and then we can take them in groups. I just want to make sure that people have a chance to speak. Anyone else who wants to ask something? No. Okay. So yeah, anyone? Suresh, do you want to speak to one on humans and biodiversity?
So I see your point, and yes, there is some value in having spaces that are devoid, I think, of human presence, but not in a city-like environment, right? We have species that have kind of also adapted to living with us, and some of the species thrive in highly kind of urban spaces. Some species get favored over the others, etc. But I think because we're talking in the context of neighborhood parks, there is some interesting research, I think, again from Harini's and Savita's work and Subhadra Devi's work from ATRI, where they talk about even within the neighborhood parks, where you have one area left aside for which are devoid of trees, but more of shrubs and just grassy areas, seem to harbor much more biodiversity. Right? So even within a space, just having a very diverse kind of a ecosystem is very useful. But I would actually say that keeping humans out completely, I don't know whether it will work in our city spaces. I don't think it should be like that. As it is, in order for us to get out and explore nature, many of us leave the city, go outside, and it's very expensive. Right, so most people can't do that. I mean, many of us have to think quite a lot if we want to go to a jungle lodges, for example. And so these spaces, neighborhood parks, become very important spaces for all of us to experience nature, but to also empathize with other creatures who are using those spaces, right? And to think of them as important refuges for butterflies and birds and and so therefore, again, the problem of the horticulture department coming in, constantly pruning a lot of these vegetation. Many of them are pruned during the nesting time of birds, right? So again, there's no conversation, dialogue, so much of research that we're doing, but nobody wants to read these papers. Nobody wants to have a conversation. So we have to make sure, I think, that we engage as much as we can.
Do you want to talk about the Sankey and Jakur comparison? I mean, I think we all agree, and then unfortunately that's a complete example of one kind of a lake. But even the Sankey Walkers Association is trying to do so much now to protect that lake from takeover and from whether it's real estate construction or concretization of the parks, and they are also fighting a losing battle. So I
think it's beyond repair now. I think yeah.
Suresh, can I ask you a question? Sorry,
Please.
just because historically, when do you think these boards came up in all our neighborhood parks? This do not do this, do not do that. Because sorry,
I think
I'm only in
5
Bangalore
years ago, around 5 or 6
Only
years
5
ago.
before that. So I remember because I used them in a presentation once I'll tell you, so 2013.
Right.
So it's been there from 2013 because I have a photograph 2012, which is when I took a photo. Do not boards. So at least then, but not much before that, I think.
No, before that there was nothing.
Yeah.
It was there was no gates, there was no fencing all around. People could jump in, jump out. We, like you said, that we walked in the middle of the night through Kapoor Park.
I was so thrilled when I went to Mysore because there's a guy running around Karanji Lake. Karanji Kare, and he just stopped and he went this side and he plucked some neem leaves and he stuffed them into shirt pocket and went back jogging. It's just exactly what we used to do in Bangalore, right?
Shall I tell you a short story? Like we were there in Cubbon Park at 8 or 9 in the night, friends walking inside the park. Then suddenly we saw in the darkness some trees walking towards us. Obviously, we all pissed in our pants and we didn't know what was. There were also two friends of our girls who were also scared that trees walking and all that. And suddenly we realized these trees have legs. So then we realized that the trees saw us and they ran out of the park with the trees, and there were these two men who had chopped sandalwood trees and they rushed out of the park and they put it in this auto and the auto fled with the trees. So somebody got lucky, but next day there was a newspaper thing about sandalwood trees being cut in Cubbon Park and all that. But this was an experience I will remember for the rest of my life.
Anybody wants to share how they engage with their parks in their neighborhood? Any? Yes, please.
Yes.
So I live in this neighborhood called Cooktown, and we have these two parks, Milton Street and High Street, which face each other. One is for children, one is for adults. And in around 2014, we were after the MLA and the corporator to do something about the really bad state of the park. There was garbage everywhere, the children's swings, slides, everything was broken. It was dismal. And I don't know, I think they were just so fed up of us coming as an RW and insisting on this that they gave us an MOU it was for a year to begin with. And then we actually had it for 6 years, the park, and we raised our own funds and we continued to look after the park. During the pandemic, we finally gave it off because it was really hard to maintain it. So we gave it back to the BBMP, and now it's unfortunate, but it's getting back to what it used to be. But during that time, what you were talking about earlier, we included the kids in the neighborhood. And I think that ownership that they have felt, and now these kids have all become teenagers and even older, I think that their childhood spent there, looking after the park in a way that I haven't, like we were raising funds together, the kids were involved, everything. And it was such a positive, lovely community experience for all of us. So I just wanted to share that. Yes.
That's a lovely story. Thank you. One more hand somewhere. Yeah, you have the mic. Yeah. Oh, you were just holding the mic.
Yeah, no, I mean, the mic kind of came to me, so I have to speak. No, I come from, my hometown is Ernakulam, and there are only two parks there, Subhash Park and Children's Park. And the Children's Park is a traffic park. And I remember so I've got two brothers and the youngest is 9 years younger to me. So by the time, so every weekend we would go to these parks and I was fed up. So at one point I just said, I'm not going to any more children's parks because I had grown up. I remember my parents sitting me down and saying that it's for everyone and, it's not just, the youngest one was still young and we had to take you, and there's not many other places where you could go in Kerala. Not in Kerala, but in Cochin. The other thing is, so therefore that transition when I came to Bangalore was quite interesting because being in a place where there are only two parks to here, and I come from Yelahanka and there are some beautiful parks there. The SFS colony, the gates of most of the houses in that society open into the parks, and it's like one lovely, winding, gorgeous place. And some of the art schools being there, they also do a large number of art and art activities in these parks. The only other place that I've seen this kind of very close network with parks is Delhi, because Delhi also has, a lovely park system where you could get out and go into. Yes. Thank you.
Thanks. Actually, one of my earliest memories, now I think of it, is so Delhi. I used to go with my father and feed the deer in Deer Park. But then when I came to Bangalore, we used to do the same because Lal Bagh at that time would allow you to feed the deer, and now you can't do that anymore. So There is no, there are no deer. It stopped in, I think, the mid 80s. By the mid 80s, it had stopped, yeah.
And if you read the accounts of the zoo and the kind of animals which were there, you'll be shocked and surprised. Orangutan, elephants, tigers, ostriches, kangaroos, you name it, they all had it.
But fascinatingly, there are tarantulas in Kavan Park. Yes, there are tarantulas in Kavan Park, and they keep getting sighted. And I keep getting photographs from people excitedly sharing it and saying, "Tarantulas, really?" And somebody thinks that they've been left there, but no, because we have tarantulas in this country, and being so close to the Western Ghats.
Wow.
Yes.
So this is the
Yeah.
history.
Yeah.
So, by the way, those of you who don't, who are on Twitter, please follow Vena's account, because you'll hear all kinds of things that when she goes to a park, you'll see ant making spiders and all kinds of interesting, the tiny things that you don't land up looking at, but you will find in some of her tweets. So,
I'm able to look down into the veg.
yeah, with that, I'll thank my two wonderful panelists. Thank you so much, Suresh. Thank you so much, Vena. I think this is a really, really good discussion. We did miss Rupa, but I think we've had a very fascinating discussion. And thank you to all of you for turning up on Friday evening and sharing your stories with us about parks.
And fight for our parks.
Yes. Yes. Thanks, Asha.